Good morning. Thank you, everyone. I thought we had a great framing of the day and the situation and the possibilities this morning. I'm Karen Ross. I'm Secretary of the Department of Food and Agriculture, and this is Sarge Green, who knows more about water than anybody I know practically. And he's also doing a lot of facilitating up and down the state with a number of the districts as they start their groundwater management work, which I'm sure is fascinating, but that's for another day, right? Another day. So he's a very good facilitator. I wanted to just take a couple of minutes to touch on laying a basis of some additional tools that we have available as we talk about the technology, where the challenges are, what we could be doing more of or be doing better. I think it's important to also understand that at this moment in time, we have some specific programs, and one of my particular interests is making sure that as money continues to come into these programs, we're being smart, we're being strategic, and we're leveraging the dollars with existing programs. Many people who work in agriculture are very familiar with the stream of funding that's made available on an annual basis through the Farm Bill for conservation programs through the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and certainly water-saving techniques as a long-time practice that's been funded through USDA. Last year and again this year, there has been additional funding to the state of California specific to the drought, and it's considerable funding that's made available through USDA. USDA and the Bureau of Reclamation over the last number of years have partnered on the Water Smart program, which has its focus on improving or modernizing the delivery of water from the irrigation district to the farms and ranches, and that is a program that they continue to run jointly. So that's one we can think about when we're thinking about leveraging. If they're modernizing the delivery system from the irrigation district to the farm, then is that the best place for us to be targeting some of our dollars? We also know that the Energy Commission, because it was touched on briefly today, has a brand new program that is about the water and energy use on farms. And then the California Department of Food and Agriculture a year ago in the first round of drought funding was provided $10 million for on-farm water use efficiency improvements. We had 133 projects that were funded for $8.4 million. And I think it's interesting to know how those broke out as we think about where we want to invest for the future. 60% of the funding went to soil moisture monitoring systems for better irrigation scheduling. 32% of the funding went to micro irrigation and drip systems. 22% of the funding went to energy efficient pumps. A lot of those were switching from diesel to electric or solar. 22% of the funding went to the use of evapotranspiration data gathering, also to use in irrigation scheduling. 12% of the funding went to the installation of more energy efficient pumps and variable frequency drive pumps. And 3% of the funding went to the use of low pressure irrigation systems. 43% of all of the projects were multiple use of several of these kinds of things. Covered about 25,000 acres that were included. The savings in water over a 10-year lifespan of those projects would be about 250,000 acre feet. And because it was funded through the Cap and Trade program, we are capturing data for the first time on greenhouse gas emission reductions, which is about 2.1 million metric tons. So that's how the first round of funds have gone out. Second $10 million was made available. The application period just closed a week ago on Monday. We saw almost a doubling in interest in the program. We have 345 applications that will go out to our technical review teams. So we know, as Dave and several others pointed out this morning, there's a big appetite for this technology. But I want to second, if not triple, everything Dave said about the need for education and some of the low-tech stuff, which may not qualify for cap and trade funding, something we really want to work with NRCS and our academic institutions to make sure we're marrying up that technical assistance to go with these kinds of investments. So, Sarge, you've got the questions you want us to answer, right?
I'm going to hopefully try and frame it a little better so that to meet the goals that Karen just laid out in terms of getting the best return on investment. So not only do I then have a framework, then we will have a series of questions here that we'll start to discuss and hopefully capture some of the other ideas to answer some of the questions. So the rough framework that I'd like to then use today so that we are all on the same page is we've got, in my estimation, 3 areas. I think Peter Williams said it best. He had actually 5. Well, I think we boiled it down to essentially technology. What are the technologies available? How do we apply them efficiently and where? But the second is information management, because part of that package of making sure that technology works is getting feedback on how to deploy it properly. And the third is the one that Karen just finished with, and that's training and education, because the best system in the world, if it isn't operated properly by the people who are using it, it's going to fall apart and not provide the original goals. So in terms of water use management, deployment in the right places is one of the things that we need to talk about. And what we talk about in ag water use efficiency circles is both recoverable and irrecoverable areas. There are areas that you don't want the water to be wasted because it'll go into either a saline sink or it's not recapturable in a way, so that we need to have efficiency in those particular locations. In recoverable areas, which is the areas like, the rice water, where it's re-released, does it make sense to go into precision technology when you have other values that are very important to all of us? So the rice water's either used in place for waterfowl habitat or re-released into a river and becomes part of river flow. In the case of precision application in some areas over groundwater, what has happened is we've lost groundwater recharge because the inefficient systems used to put a lot of water onto the ground, and it percolated deep and became part of our overall supply. So there's kind of a 2 frames then there in terms of deploying technology. One is to make sure that we deploy it appropriately in irrecoverable areas, and then to understand if we deploy it in irrecoverable areas to provide mitigation. The second area, information management, data, what, where, how much. On-farm decision tools are clearly important, but we also now have a responsibility for transparency to make sure that data flows up as well, so that people understand that the money that we're spending, we're getting the return on the investment in that respect well. So now we're talking about measurement in terms of meters on wells or whatever the other things that we need to do. Under the new Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, well metering will be a requirement under the new Sustainable Groundwater Management Plans. Then the last area, training, how do we get it done? Because it's not traditionally part then of the investments. And should we somehow figure out a way to tie training, operation and maintenance and strategies to make sure that the investments continue to reap the results, how do we tie the 2 together? Maybe there's a way to finance training through the original application investment by requiring a certain amount be reserved for training or ongoing maintenance and operation. So that's kind of the framework that I'd like to use. And then I think we need to go into the questions and then ask you people and figure out what are the areas that in those 3 big sections, technology, information management, and training education, what do you offer? What do you see? What do you know about those particular areas? So that we can get a working list of all of the technologies, all of the information management strategies, and how to deal with the training and operations and maintenance issues and education issues, and then bring that back at the end of the day as part of the deliverable to the conference, okay? That's going to be what we're going to have to report out is, what do we get out of this, this particular session?
So, Sarge, I think it would be interesting, show of hands, just so we know who's in the room. How many farmers do we have today?
Hi, Don.
That's about less than 1% of the population. That's very true to the demographics of California. Irrigation companies, irrigation installers, irrigation consultants, academics. Dave, you don't count. And other government agencies. Does that include irrigation districts? Okay, great. Anybody else? Is there a category I didn't get? Consumer.
No, technology company.
Technology company.
Yes,
Great.
saving a lot of water.
Okay. Nice mix. Nice mix of things. Nice mix of things. Okay. Start
Question.
facilitating. Well, I said farmer. Sorry. Okay. Okay. 4. We got 4 farmers. Tito, did you raise your hand? 5. Okay. We're going to skew way. So I like to move around, but does somebody just want to start this? Does somebody have a question or want to make a comment before we get started? Otherwise, we're just going to jump into the questions. Try to capture all of your good thinking. You're here for a reason. You were picked for your wisdom, your experience. No.
If you want to hear about sandy soil, I can tell you.
Okay. So Sarge, do you want to jump in with the questions?
The first one is, what technology should be introduced? What technology should be introduced or scaled up in the agricultural sector?
Sir.
I think the most important technology.
We're going to pass around a microphone to make sure everybody can.
At the essence of this, you cannot manage what you don't measure. So the most important technology, in my view, is one that allows ag, urban, et al. To manage irrigation, agricultural water use. And from that, you can go further.
Yeah, I represent Delicato Family Vineyards, and we've started a research consortium to try and address some of these ideas. And the one thing I see missing quite a bit when it comes to soil moisture probes is their proper placement. And so what we've done is we've used the soil information systems mapping that Trimble provides. And I like to make the analogy that when you have a vineyard on a given spacing, there's so much soil available to each vine. That soil represents the gas tank that vine goes with. By using the soil mapping system to identify the point in the field that has the smallest gas tank, you then adjust your irrigation scheduling to keep the small tank full, and you don't over-irrigate the rest of the field. We're backing that up by working with TerraVion and weekly aerial imaging. And in that manner, we can measure the integrated vine response, calibrate it to our soil probe locations, and then verify that our irrigation scheduling is appropriate and is not wasting water. But I think it's the marrying of a lot of these. We are deploying a new type of soil sensor that we're able to put out in the field, and they communicate in a synchronized mesh so that we're able to really cover large areas of a vineyard with a small network of soil probes that are all communicating and being communicated directly up via cell phone signal on a weather station. So we're capturing the weather, the soil, and there's no people involved. So I think that's an approach that I'd like to see with the integration of all those things.
Integration platforms, and are there technologies here today that we can use in your integration platforms that would help advance that concept? Because that's a framework, once again. You need to have all of the pieces, not just soil mapping, but then the sensors and then the application equipment to match with what you've found. Okay. Aerial imagery.
Hello. What I'd like to add to your point is that we talk a lot about the soil, the gas reservoir, the gas station, but we don't talk so much about the plant and how much the plant is using. And for me, it's like looking at the gas station without looking at your car and your car mileage consumption. Every car is different. You'll have, for the same distance, some cars using a lot of gas, while some will be more efficient. And if you apply the same recipe or you apply the same gas volume to your car, you're going to end up wasting a lot. So for me, looking at the plant is actually the real debate, because the plant integrates everything: the root system, the soil, its environment, the leaf area, and everything. So I think the debate also should also focus on the plants and what are the plant's measurements, because, okay, what's available to the plant, but how the plant consumes that water. And does the plant really need that amount of water that is applied in the soil?
Is anybody here from the dendritic measurement or sap flow measurement community? That's you. Okay, so we've got that piece covered. Okay.
Develop insect protein out of the waste stream. So you can take grape pumice or tomato pumice or any of these kinds of waste streams and develop crickets or worms, things that can be used for poultry feed. And we can triple the amount of protein developed per gallon of water in many cases, because you're taking that waste stream and getting more value out of it. And I think we're in a whole segment of technologies that aren't about water savings and water optimization, but more yield per gallon.
Matthew Pryor from Observant. I'm a little bit afraid to talk in an Australian accent after a Charles Slater. I promise I'm not selling magnetic water technology. And whilst it would be self-serving to talk about on-farm water efficiency, because that's what we do, the important lessons from Australia were actually that the policies were important. And if we're talking today, adoption enough to get, a significantly move the needle from a basin or a state scale, then you have to start at least at the district or the basin. If, we can talk about making individual properties more efficient, but the issue there is one of adoption. But if you do get significant adoption, what does the district do? They can't cope with that change in demand, in use behaviour. So the things that were important in Australia were actually policies that provided, hundreds of millions of dollars for the irrigation districts, or we call schemes, to replumb, to be able to deliver water, more in on demand, or, in a way that then supported individual growers to improve their efficiency. And if we don't talk about that today, I think that we're missing the big picture.
And Ami, is it $50 million that WaterSmart provides for districts themselves? We're looking at, if the funding stream continues at CDFA, we've already been talking to the Department of Water Resources about doing a similar pilot program to see if we can't accelerate that, invest in infrastructure and on-farm, but really targeting on-farm in those areas that have already done some of that modernization. It's a lot of money, and you had a lot of money at the time to do that, right?
I'm not from government, but I'm quoting from memory, but I believe the entire bill was multiple billions of dollars. The part that approached irrigation districts was called the Private Irrigation Infrastructure Operators Program, which I believe was $400 million.
On Cameron.
Right. We look at the different irrigation systems, we have technology out there. It's being adapted. We've got companies like Observant. We have John Deere that are providing monitoring in the field at different depths. But what I tend to see is that these are not totally complete for what we need. They're not in an easy to access form. We see that, we have people that are using this trying to use the technology out in the field, and a lot of them don't speak English. We've got to get the technology available and in a simple form. And I like the idea. I'd love to have a tap into a tomato, several tomato plants out in my field to where I could coordinate what's actually being used to what I have in the soil, watch the depletion, that it takes somebody with a pretty highly skilled skill set to be able to use that type of technology. And when you're farming a lot of different fields, it gets cumbersome. You can get data overload to where it really isn't effective. So,
You're
And
in the skills column that we mentioned.
nah, I'm on the edge.
Yeah, but Don's bringing up a really important point, and it's educating the growers is one thing, but educating the people who every day are the ones that are turning on the switches or not, who know to look at filters or not. So one of the suggestions, and for people who don't know our science advisor, Dr. Ami Gunasekara, there is a new job training money available and putting specifications into our request for proposals that if you qualify for one of these grants, you'll send 1 or 3 people to do irrigation training, which is one of those categories that's been identified as a big need. It is something that we're looking at and we believe would be a good investment of trying to tie those 2 programs together. Again, it's trying to think about, we've got scarce resources, but how do we leverage them and get as much synergy as possible? Now, I know you're going to talk about broadband.
Actually, I'm not.
Well,
I'm going to talk about something else. You'll be, and actually, it's a crossover between technology and information, because one of the things I think which affect all of this technology, we're all talking about, water efficiency with the drought, but part of it is if you look at farming and the sharply increased use of groundwater and the need to look at what's, a thorough, accurate knowledge, information of the aquifers that are down there and the interrelationship, how they tie up regionally. And there's some information on it, but not probably as much detail as we would like to have, especially if groundwater management is going to be part of dealing with the drought. The non-broadband part is this, that NASA has ground-penetrating radar, which they're using for Mars to look for water. They're willing to try to take this device and use it here in California to measure the aquifers below ground. It potentially offers a much faster and less expensive way of getting at the measurements. This is separate from well data. The information synthesis would be as you take the well data you have and you mix it with the data that NASA would be able to give you. And essentially their goal is that they could create the equivalent of a Google Earth map, only of underground of the aquifers, and then use that to manage.
Okay, I've already got some of that information. We're already doing some of it, Robert, but then I have a question to the audience. Is there anybody here that is aware of or knows how to use this technology? However, there are some limitations, okay? We can do the top of the groundwater basin real well. I've already got the groundwater basin in the San Joaquin Valley in 3D by GIS, all right? I know I can show you and spin it and everything else. It's really the problem in the San Joaquin Valley, for example, is one of the largest groundwater basins, is mapping the quality and the depth to the bottom of the aquifer system. If JPL and NASA can come up a way that the penetrating radar scans can distinguish fresh water versus saline water, then we have something. But in the meantime, there is only old technology. Some of the best data we get is actually still from oil field exploration because they go through everything to try and find the oil patches, all right? So how do does anybody here know of technology or using whether JPL can calibrate in a way that helps us quantify our aquifer system better because we need it in terms of the water budget? That was one of the important things that came out this morning is water budgets. What are we going to be able to spend in the future at what rate so that we don't oversubscribe continuously, okay? So answer the question.
I think that NASA actually, the system that they use, it's not measuring water directly. It's a different kind of read.
Density.
But they indicated they have the capacity to tell you the type of water that's there. The other part is I know that Lawrence Livermore Labs has done, they can tell you the quality of the water. They've measured nitrate levels at different depths, and they can actually measure how old the water is. So they can, so there's
Nigel's
maybe,
here.
and there's, I think Livermore is here. But so there might be additionality. I think this gets back to the point that these technologies already exist, but if we add them together, we might get a better result.
I just wanted to mention that going back to old technologies, I think it's really important to remember to go back to basics, and that not only are the plants important, but the criticalness of the soil and the microorganisms in the soil, and the organic material. You can often save up to 30% of the water, and it's critical. It's biggest water savings that you can have, actually, is to have that really solid microorganisms, with a lot of microorganisms in the soil. It's paramount in good water savings.
Has Secretary Ross got a deal for you? They've started in the Department of Food and Agriculture something called the Healthy Soils Initiative, right?
Right.
So that is part of the retention landscape that we're going to talk about in the future, and that is to optimize water holding capacity and also soil health in terms of microorganisms and nutrient management. That's all part of new initiatives that need to be part of the ongoing strategy. So once again, it's an integration strategy. We have to have healthy soil to have water use efficiency. So why don't you talk about your program?
We have a great idea for a program. It's not funded yet, but the governor has proposed a program that would take an integrated approach, and it really is about building up soil organic matter and carbon and water retention. So it's in development, and in fact, next Friday will be the second meeting of the Environmental Farming Panel, which is being co-hosted with Cal Recycle. This meeting will look specifically at compost. Don Cameron, who spoke earlier, happens to be the chair of the Environmental Farming Panel. So we're really getting a lot of good input from across the state. So thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Well, either one. One of the things we keep hearing about is data accessibility and consumability. So as you're talking about the groundwater issue, and if there's a way to get to the depth of the groundwater, the quality of the groundwater, combine that with the surface water information, as well as the applications of water, the ET information, the NPK, the pesticides, all of these things being combined to help support IRWIM and SIGMA and the water basin, water balance. What the company I represent, AgriLogix, is doing is building a massive database to handle all of that and do the computational part using the best of Silicon Valley, cloud-based computing, and global scale capability. And we're already able to do this with many of these components and doing it for irrigation districts, water districts, and growers around California today.
So what's the biggest barrier for deploying this if you've already got this built? Just cost, or is it other things?
Funding, project funding.
Is your company's
Any venture
AgriLogix?
capitalists in the room? I forgot to ask that one, didn't I?
Thanks, Karen.
AgriLogix, is that your, got it? Okay, we want to make sure and get you mentioned that you're part of that potential opportunity. Sir, this gentleman wants to talk about managing soil.
Yeah, that's magic, because what he was talking about is really what we are doing. We've been able to split the clay particles apart in individual flakes, so you can mix it with the irrigation water in the sandy soil, and then she'll be happy when she's seeing the results, because I think that's the main reason why we're getting such results as we're doing. We are saving so much water, and we're getting so much increase in the yield, so we're talking about water efficiency increase about 800 to 1200%. So it's amazing. We're saving 2/3 of the water in normal weather conditions, and if it's very, very windy and very, very more than 110 degrees, then we are saving 50%. So it's just because of the fungus, the increase in the fungus which are creating the symbiosis in the sand particles and between the nutrients and the plants. So thank you very much.
So we have a lot more questions, and we've got about a half an hour to cover the last questions too. But I saw 2 more hands go up. Yes. Oh, three hands. I got you 2. I got him 2. Okay, but we have someone behind you.
Morning, Ms. Secretary. As technologies approach the state of California to try to help in this problem, is there a clearinghouse or a one-stop service that directs to the research that's needed for the grower and the farmers to know the difference between what they called this morning the magic magnet versus realities that fit the particulars of California's different crops, and just getting that documentation and blessing from the research community would be helpful in expediting, good technologies coming to the surface for you. And that's how that would work.
Well,
No, we don't have it yet, but that's one of the proposed outcomes of this particular conference is what are the other technologies that we need? And whether it's a web-based dump or whatever you want to do it as, how do we get all that information in one place so that then it can be weighed, sorted? And remember I said we want to look at return on investment in terms of water savings and or improvement in agricultural output, whatever the criteria that we then need to use. So yeah, we need to do something along those lines, but in how web pages work and everything, they get stale real quick or they get overloaded. So that's a technology question that we probably need to have somebody else weigh in. I don't know, AgriLogic, have you thought about that? How do you store information about technologies that can then pass on through and be utilized and then you greet the data out of those technologies, right? So.
We handle both structured and unstructured data. Unstructured data could be technology reports, could be contracts from growers with their buyers, any number of forms, as well as field observation and a variety of information. So the data type is not an issue anymore for us, at least, to be able to put these things together and tie it to a water basin or a watershed.
So maybe I misunderstood your question because when I hear from farmers, they want to see the data. They don't want to see a salesperson until the salesperson has data in hand. And usually that data, they're going to feel better about if it's gone through just because the land grants have cooperative extension and they've done field trials. We have 2 outstanding academic centers for irrigation technology. We have the one at Fresno and the one at Cal Poly. And I thought that's what you were looking for is where's the state going to send all this through? Because all of us, I mean, I have so many people come to the department, they must think we're a sales force. And we're not. And our first question is, who are you working with in our academic situation? Okay. And I think that would be a great outcome is that there's a place for this to go, and we use that to create the research roadmap. There's a lot of existing technologies, but if there are gaps, let's get that and signal that to our academic research partners. Okay.
I think a lot about waste and recycling, and when I drive around California, you see all those open aqueducts and canals, and I just wonder how much water evaporates, and if you just covered the canals and the aqueducts, could you save that water? And secondly, how much gray water ends up in the Pacific Ocean, and stimulating algae growth and bad things like that in the ocean that could be recycled back into agriculture. Are those issues that, so I might add, waste and recycling as number 4 to your technology, information, and education.
Hi, first I'd like to thank AMI for doing a great job with the SWEET program.
Yes.
I'm with a company called Hortal, and we're bringing the tensiometer of 50-year-old technology to the 21st century, and we're here to really help the growers look at data. So the growers really know when to turn the water on, when to turn it off, and never really pass the root zone or past field capacity. The tension is the most accurate old school reading that is accurate. And we throw it on the cloud, and growers know the exact time to turn the water and turn it off. And once that data is generated, you can literally allocate water for every single farmer in the whole state with no limitation. He doesn't need to use more water than he actually need.
One of the issues you come up against is data sharing. And especially, say, if the district is delivering the water, you're starting to meter the water at the turnout with high degree of accuracy. That's great from being able to optimise delivery and upstream, making your entire system more efficient. But there's a tricky policy versus privacy issue around how much the grower is prepared to share from their turnout forward. And that was one of the other, in the scheme scale and district scale metering projects that were rolled out in Australia. I just don't want to have anything thrown at me. But the most significant points there were getting actual frameworks, very clear upfront frameworks about what could be done with the data. that growers understandably were very uncomfortable about that being individually identified. But they're quite receptive to the idea that the scheme has to modernise and you'll get a benefit because you can do far more efficient water deliveries if the district can deliver water to you more efficiently, exactly when you need it, and importantly, turn it off when you're finished, because the other problem is you might be done, but the district might have, decided they're going to deliver that water to you anyway. And if you don't need it, it goes somewhere else, which is typically a bad outcome.
So sorry, Don, we have to move because I know Wade in particular really wants us to wrap our head around how can we accelerate the deployment of drip irrigation and other forms of water-saving irrigation technology. And that's exactly what you were going to talk about, right, Don? Don and then Inga.
I think that the incentive is the cost of your water. I've got property in irrigation districts that have water that sells for $2,200 an acre foot, and other irrigation districts that it costs less than $50 for the year.
Oh my God.
Where there's flood water, or not flood water. There's water that, and everybody flood irrigates. This year, there's only been one irrigation on that from that district, and now you see everybody switching to groundwater, and all of a sudden you're seeing drip irrigation going in. So unless you're paying a higher price, unless you have some incentive, you're not going to see a lot of change in some of these areas. Where the cost is high, you've seen early adoption. Where it's inexpensive, it's unless there's some other reason for putting it in for your crop, you haven't seen the adoption. And I don't know how we get around that, but. Well, I'm not saying.
Let the record show that Don Cameron
I'm not saying we need to increase water rates, but I am saying that we need better coordination between the districts that do have a lot of water to work with their growers to implement water-saving strategies.
Unless it's in those recoverable areas I'm talking about, where that is getting back into the groundwater.
Well, I don't say we get rid of our legacy system. I say we leave them in place.
Leave them in place and make them dual.
Yep.
Yeah, that's smart management. Yeah.
Thank you, Secretary Ross. I'm Inge Bisconner with the Toro Company. We are a micro-irrigation technology provider, as many know. I'd like to piggyback off of Don's statement that, water cost is a big deal, but I would also like to say that many of the growers that adopt our technology actually do not have expensive water, and they're really doing it for the production advantage. So there is a water cost aspect, but there's a production cost, and as we travel and work with growers all over the state and the country and the world, every region kind of has a different hot button of why they're adopting technology, or drip in particular. So as you know, as we've been meeting and talking, specifically our recommendations to increase drip irrigation technology in the state, we have technology, but as Dave pointed out in his address, some of it's not being implemented very well. And education and training are a huge deal. And our company has done a lot of work to make that sort of material available. So since we're collecting so for the record, we have material, and we're more than happy to partner with anybody, really, to extend that education and training to the growers and anybody else who's implementing the technology. And the second point I would love to make is on the funding side. A lot of the growers would like to adopt drip irrigation, but they don't have access to or ability to obtain the funding. And we know with the Irrigation Association, we've done work to show that the payback period on a drip system investment is often less than a few years. And under normal circumstances, a grower would very much be in a good position to be profitable and to gain that technology. And then there's all the other benefits of having adopted that technology for the state and for the society in general. So helping to execute and implement and make available funding for drip irrigation technology, I think, would be a great help in expanding.
So I have go ahead.
Could I follow on that a little bit?
Please do.
The question that you raised is, do these people have a lack of sophistication to access the funding? They don't know how to get it? Or is it that we need to do a better job of advertising and moving the funding out
Probably all of the above, but in particular what we hear the most is getting loan guarantees. I mean, funding is available. Our company offers funding, but to get the loan guarantees is a big challenge, and perhaps the state could help with that.
I just learned yesterday, because I brought this up in my comments at another ag technology session, that iBank actually is already set up to do that. So I think we just need to capitalize on some existing programs and make that fit. I want to ask a question, because we know, for example, Bob Curtis, that 87% of the almond acreage, because the return on investment and a lot of it's newer, is under drip or micro irrigation. But considering how many acres are in almonds, there's still some space there. And our permanent crops tend to have moved to this for a lot of good reasons. Should we be targeting crops in the annual crop range, knowing that a lot of those are down, but should we be working harder on alfalfa and corn, which are two large-scale crops in this state? Would it make sense to target crops as opposed to areas or water districts? Randy Fiorini, I know you must have some thoughts on that.
Well, thank you, Secretary Ross. As a former director of the Turlock Irrigation District, I just about got ran out of town when I recommended that we were approaching the point where buried drip or drip tape in field corn technology was about ready to be applied. The expense of that for the dairymen in our area versus the continuing to flood irrigate was significant. I think the yields would have proven to be the best reason to do that. There hasn't been much movement in that area, but that's a portion of agriculture that's ripe for improving water use efficiency. Having said that, now on the counter side, there are 13 communities that depend entirely upon groundwater for their drinking water systems, and it's the over-irrigation of much of the dairy farming crops that is recharging the groundwater in support of those 13 communities. So every solution has unintended consequences.
Kathy, yeah, recoverable areas, that's going to be the key. Yeah.
Thank you, Karen. So picking up on that, and I think Don brought it up earlier, was this idea of dual systems, and we've really just got to get back to, you know, Cooperative Extension was reaching out and saying, let's put in more efficient irrigation systems and take out the old. But we got to go back and keep those old systems in there, because as precipitation and runoff changes and we get these really heavy storms, we're going to have opportunities, I think, to capture water and put it back in the ground. So to address those issues for those communities, dilute water in areas where you have high nitrate concentrations and to solve those kinds of problems, and help bring basins back into balance. So I think we need to look at the whole suite of options and start targeting areas where there's that potential.
Abe.
So, yeah, I like what I'm hearing. And to your question, yeah, I think we should target so let me back up just a bit. So we've got multiple programs, CEC, CDFA, state, board, et cetera. And I think there's a common denominator of solutions, and I think, you know, DRIP offers part of that, and to target, if corn is shown that tends to be inefficient in driving nitrates to the groundwater, why not target those crops to deal with the groundwater issues, deal with water saving? So it seems to me, yeah, and I sort of said it, strategic and targeted. So that's the kind of things that I think are absolutely need to be discussed. And sure, we got limited resources. Let's put it where we get multiple benefits, not just on the energy side, not just on the water use side. Let's protect our groundwater as well. So totally agree with those comments, and I think that's one of the areas that we need to get convergence.
I've written that raises how do we organize it to be able to deliver on the promise. So do we need the agencies? Yeah.
Ami and I got
is going to get everybody in the room and say, guys, we have to work together on this to be able to deliver.
I say that a lot.
I think you're right, and I'm going to give you the support to do it.
Yeah, thank you, Sage.
But I think that's real important. The other one I got out of it, correct me if I'm wrong, but it may be useful for us to later on to suggest that we break this thing down into some kind of a work groups or tasks areas, and information technology clearly is one where I've heard where we need to get together better on information technology. We need to get better on targeting solutions in terms of water application, so there's maybe a work cell there that we need to build. So what else do we need to do?
Yes, my name is Peter Cooper. I'm with the California Employment Training Panel. And so we traditionally fund training in manufacturing and other sectors, but have been working with the Department of Water Resources, CEC, and other agencies to see how we can support training needs in the agricultural sector. The last 2 years, we've spent roughly, well, not roughly exactly, $2 million of general fund dollars for training in coordination with sister agencies, some of it for private sector employers, and some of it for a program with the community colleges. They're in the middle of that. So I just wanted to encourage any private sector employers that are involved in agricultural or water technology, if you have workforce training needs, please come and see me or visit our website, because we do have our what we call core funding that is available for job training. And so we'd love to help, and we do have funds available for job training.
Yeah, we have a problem with training the train. In order to keep that's part of the problem. Community colleges are doing a great job, but I think they need to have the support necessary to expand, and maybe we can help them as well.
Yeah.
Dave and I talked about it.
Yeah. I rose my hand when you said what else should we need to do, and by merging information technology with new practices, I think when I listen to all the new data that's available, what we are missing is it's a little bit like medicine in the 17th century. You know, we had new symptoms, we didn't know what to make out of those. Now we have new data, but we don't know how to diagnose the issue. So what I think we could try to do is understanding how the crop is actually changing its performances according to the new data. And we know very little about it. We have very good knowledge about how much data, how much water is going to be supplied, how much the climatic demand is going to ask water from the plant, but we don't know how the plant responds actually. And that's where we are wasting a lot of water. We assume that alfalfa and corn will be using more water, but when we go for perennial crops, we don't know how different crops are going to modulate their water use. And there is a huge potential here to save water. As a matter of fact, we work with vineyards, and vineyards have a tendency to overuse water by 50%. Just because they derive their practices from almond growers. By respecting the plant and by having a medical approach to agriculture, we can do major savings. And I think that's a new challenge.
Well, my response would be, where do we deploy? Because I think a lot of the larger operators probably are pretty sophisticated, but we have a body still of relatively medium to small-sized operations, and it's very difficult then to deliver that type of technology integration at that level. So that is one of the challenges, and I would challenge you then, how to build the platform necessary to reach a larger audience.
Yeah, so I think we have to start small. First, pick one crop that's going to trigger a lot of attention. So that's maybe vineyards or... and then have a few reference points that we will base as a framework to extrapolate over larger acreage. But we have to start with small points. And from those points, build an intelligence that respects the plant.
Almost going to have to talk sooner or later.
And let's not jump to all the gee whiz high technology stuff when we're talking about improving water savings in irrigation technology. We had a mention of the medium and small people. One of the huge problems that David pointed out this morning is that we don't have flow meters on our systems. So how can you manage what you don't measure and monitor?
Good point. And that was your very first comment this morning, wasn't it? Yeah.
I think that we have another opportunity to your point about how do you deploy technology, and I think that opportunity are the groundwater sustainability agencies, and this is also where you can double up, where agencies within the same watershed are going to have to double up, and that's going to be a point of synergy. We're in the developmental stage of it, and I would also say the same thing about deployment of technology. If you take a watershed by watershed basis, there's going to be differences. What works in a coastal watershed versus the San Joaquin watershed is entirely different, and you might have different solutions. But I think the opportunity is to really enhance the function and the formation of groundwater sustainability agencies towards that end.
Can we have Kathy add just one last thing, please? Sure. Yeah, because then we just have 5 minutes, folks. Sorry. This is so much fun.
I'm with the California Water Foundation now. My name is Kathy Viatella. I used to be with a great nonprofit called Sustainable Conservation. I just want to give a great plug to that group. One of the things on this issue of flow meters, what I loved about this organization, they actually went in and started working with dairy farmers to understand why aren't they using flow meters, because there's been a lot of effort and money paid to just buy flow meters and give them to farmers to start to use. So it's a behavioral issue. It's an adoption of a practice, and this is where the challenge is, and the extension and the outreach is so desperately needed, whether that's done in the public sector through cooperative extension or whether it's done by the private sector. But once we started working with a small handful of dairymen and showing them, oh, okay, and I know academics do this all the time, all of us are trying to do this, and you showed them, okay, let's use a flow meter and let's look at your nitrogen and the concentrations in your effluent and what you're putting on your crop, and match it up with what you've been doing historically. And they all looked at these maps and said, oh my goodness, when I'm applying the liquid effluent onto my fields, it's not during the crop uptake. And so then they started to change and switch, but then they backed it into the system and said, oh, well, wait a minute, we don't have a variable pump. And so you work up the system and it's a chain effect. So we really need to somehow figure out a way to invest in the education, the outreach, the technical assistance that they need. I think that's a major, major area.
Make it one of the premium items. That broadband.
Somebody besides Robert.
That's Robert's area, and we need deployment in rural areas.
Yeah. And how big of a barrier is it to the deployment of all the technologies that we could have? That's, yeah. Don, and then yes, sir. Oh, you have one. Okay, sorry.
We have broadband. We use voice over internet at the ranch, but we always have difficulty. And we're now going to have to set up 2 systems to handle what we need. But my goal on my farm would be to set the whole farm up on wireless internet. There's so many different technologies out there. We have to have 900. We have to have cell phones. We have, why don't we use broadband? Why don't we use the internet? It would tie everything together so well. And I've looked for it. And there just aren't good answers right now. But I would love to have all my information come to a site online to where I could access it. That's my dream. Thanks.
I like your dream, sir.
I work with TerraAvion, and we're a technology company that delivers aerial imagery via the internet. And trying to get it into the hands of farmers has been historically a big burden, actually, and working with Delicato and folks on understanding things like our soil probe network that has to be delivered wirelessly, and we're also working on things like understanding crop water stress in orchards. We're working with a lot of almond growers on doing thermal imagery for their canopies, but understanding that there's hundreds of thousands of acres in very remote areas where the boots on the ground have to be deployed to understand the areas that are being affected, the access to broadband is a real issue. So,
Solutions.
I'm Rob Osborne from the Public Utilities Commission. We have, thanks to a grant from the NTIA, as a 5-year grant, we have one of the most complete pictures of mobile broadband on the ground in the United States. We have 7 rounds of testing. We just finished the 7th round last month. We test 2,000 locations across California. 56% of those are rural. We test AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, and Sprint. And we map that data. It's available on an interactive map that anyone can look at. We also have a free app that you can download to run your own test. That test result will be uploaded to the interactive map within 24 hours. You can see the result. We use that data to as a basis for determining eligibility for funding. We have a subsidy program called the California Advanced Services Fund, and we provide infrastructure grants and loans to providers or organizations that want to build broadband in underserved or unserved areas. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you.
Want to go first, Robert? Or? Okay. Good morning. I'm Adelina Sendejas with the California Department of Technology, actually over the Office of Broadband and Digital Literacy. Office of two. But exactly what you're saying here about the need for broadband is really important. And we are looking at how we can address that. And we definitely are looking at it from an agriculture perspective, but we're from more of a broader of education and civic and just everything. And so we are working really closely with CPUC. We are working really closely with USDA, schools, looking at how we can provide better service. And as Rob mentioned about funding, there also is a California Broadband Council, and it's represented by 9 different areas, Department of General Services, Cal OES, several different departments. And so we are looking at that. And we do have open forums. Our next meeting is potentially scheduled for September 15th at UC Riverside. But we're going to, we are looking at different areas, and I'm going to be looking at how we can improve and probably bring broadband in the area of agriculture to bring more focus to that through the council. I guess I'll let Robert kind of talk a little more about all the things that we're doing in the ag area.
I saw a hand there and a hand there and a hand there. We're already over our time, and I want to give everybody a chance to have lunch today. So we're going to try to wrap this up very quickly, please. Sorry.
Okay, real quick, just to focus on some of the solutions, because, one of the problems why there isn't broadband in the farm field, and Rob actually identified part of it, is nobody's actually thought to go and look to measure in the farm field, because the focus has been looking at where people live. But part of the challenge also is if the large telecoms don't provide the service for their business reasons, then how are you going to get the service? And sort of creating something that is a challenge, and some kind of organization that would provide the service. However, there's maybe a couple of areas where there's opportunities. One, there is technology that will come in. I just talked to a company called Mushroom, which is a spin-off from UC San Diego that has a means of pushing DSL bonding and pushing a signal into the farm field, potentially. They've done it in some areas. So there are technological opportunities. Then you have on infrastructure, you've got FirstNet, which is a public safety broadband effort on the federal government side, between $7 and $43 billion, depending upon what you look at, that will be available nationally to connect all public safety providers together, rural and urban. There's an opportunity to leverage the investment of that in California to get service into rural areas. There's Scenic, which is an existing system that the state of California invested in, connecting higher education institutions. They're now willing to leverage their system. Before it was exclusively education. And the final thing is where I think the real opportunity tied to the drought are the irrigation districts. Because many of the irrigation districts, they already have power lines, they're already invested in this. They represent an opportunity that they could be the broadband provider. The South San Joaquin Irrigation District is already doing that. I would say the fast way is talk to the irrigation districts. They have a self-interest in that, and maybe things will move.
I work with a company called Fruition Sciences, and what we do is putting on the web any available vineyard information. And as an example, we monitor the flow of the plant, using the plant as a sensor itself. And one of our customers is Kendall Jackson. And by working alongside with the Water District of Los Angeles, we show that by simply respecting the plant water flow, we could drop the water use by 50%.
But what broadband? The issue of broadband?
So we use broadband whenever it's available, and when it's not available, we have to manually send somebody to retrieve the data, and every 3 days we upload the data.
I just want to say from a technology point of view, and I don't have an answer, but just because I'm wondering if we're trying to send too much data. You know, in other words, you know, when you listen to an MP3, you're only listening to 1/3 of that song, by the way, and it's truncated. And, you know, do we have to send soil moisture sensor data every 10 seconds? You know, it doesn't really change. And so I think, you know, we need broadband or we need some type of communication. Maybe it doesn't have to be broadband, but the idea is that I think from a technology point of view, we need to be looking at, are we sending the appropriate amount of data so we don't overload and need to build a huge system?
Yeah, that goes to Don, just that it's overwhelming sometimes all the data you could get. And did I have one last one very quickly, please, and then I got to give it to Ray.
So very quickly, I would just, I think it would be very useful to be able to have a discussion about what the actual, the optimum broadband speeds and what kind of, how often, how quickly, if there are latency issues, because I think that's the key to understanding there's not going to be fiber tomorrow to the center of every farm. But what do the technologies require, and also can they be built so that there are workarounds so you don't have an issue where someone can't buy it simply because they don't have broadband now, but when they get it, then you know it may be an optimum use or something.
Good, thank you. Thank you all. Obviously, we needed 2.5 hours for this session, Wade, but since you were stingy with our time, thank you all for your participation and your comments and respecting time so we could get as many people onto the record as possible. We'll be doing a report out later this afternoon. And Sarge, I love your idea about maybe it's time for some work groups around a couple clusters here. I think that's a great idea. And with that, I'll turn it over to Wade.
Thanks for the great discussion. I just wanted to explain the logistics for lunch, obviously important to everybody here. Lunch is being provided in the form of box lunches. When you go out this door, you're going to go past the stairwell and go to what's called the Klamath Training Room and just grab a box lunch. There's some tables in there. You're welcome to sit there. You're welcome to come back in this room if you want to sit down. You're welcome to take your food outside. We're starting the next plenary session at 12:45, which is in about 50 minutes. So this will be an opportunity for you to spend time with one another and eat lunch.
Great. Thanks, Wade. Sarge, thank you.
Thank you. And if we missed anything, please come up and talk to us about it.
Yeah. Oh, of course. Sure. Hey, great to see you. Yeah, it sounds like you guys are doing some really exciting things. That's great.
What your experiences?